Hello and welcome. I'm your host Pooja Sarkar, and you're listening to the podcast from the bookshelves of Forbes India. As I announced last week that Forbes India with HarperCollins India has launched the Reset podcast series where we promise to bring you some riveting reads from their collection. For today's episode, I decided to pick up The Making of Hero by Sunil Kant Munjal, where he talks about the journey of the Munjal family from across the border to India, setting up of their cycle factory, the importance of Ramgarhyas in terms of trying to build the cycles, and how the journey has panned out over the decades. Thank you so much, Mr. Munjal, for being on the podcast. I would love to hear from you the story of building hero cycles because it starts long back. Could you take us through the whole journey when it started? You have a lot of lessons in there.
Uh, Thank you. Thank you for these questions. So basically, the purpose of writing the book, The Making of Hero, was exactly this: to reflect a little bit on history and also let the stories be known, because these are somewhat unusual and unique stories. The business did not start with any grand plan. It was started by four brothers to just survive and provide for their families, because they had, like millions of others, become refugees at the time of India's independence and India's partition. In fact, some of them came literally on the last train that came across the border and had people who were still living inside those trains. As you know, this was a very bloody migration, one of the most brutal mankind has seen. So the brothers went around to different places, to Delhi, Agra, to Mumbai, what was then Bombay, and finally settled down. Two of them finally settled down in Bombay, in Ludhiana, and then they called the other brothers one by one to also join them. And they were doing something at that time which was unusual. They started first with trading in bicycle parts. So they would go around, the youngest, Om Prakash ji, would go around procuring orders. And in order to save money, he would sleep on platforms or in waiting rooms, which actually annoyed my father, I'm told, a lot. He used to tell him that we may not have a lot of money, but we are not that poor that you cannot afford to stay in a hotel. But this is the kind of nature and culture that they had established for themselves and therefore subsequently for their business. And they would procure orders and go on and go to small manufacturers in Ludhiana, in Malerkotla, and places around there, and supply these to dealers across the country. The service they provided at that time was something unusual, because customer service is a relatively new concept in India, which is prevalent and visible only over the last 30 or 40 years. In the early years, because there was shortage of everything, whatever people made, whatever they produced will always sell. So they were like a breath of fresh air for many, many of their customers. And the customers pushed them to do more and more. They said, why don't you start making some of these components? And they did. And then in 1956, the government of India decided that they would like bicycles to be the mainstay of transportation for the common man in India. And Jawaharlal Nehru, the then Prime Minister, and Manubhai Shah, the then Industry Minister, decided that all large enterprises would be set up by the government. So things like dams, power plants, and highways and roads and steel plants would all be set up by the government. And the private sector would only set up small industry. So 128 licenses were given on one day across India for companies to make bicycles in the small scale. Now, my father did something which was quite unusual in those days. He returned the license. He said, we want to make bicycles, but we do not want to be constrained by a license which says you can make only so much and no more. Because that's what one of the conditions that the small scale license had, that you can make bicycles, but only up to this quantity. So they were fortunate that they got a license back with the small scale condition removed. In 1956, Hero Cycles started, and it made 7,500 bicycles in year one. And in 1975, it became the largest company in India. And in 1986, it became the largest company in the world for bicycle manufacturing. Obviously, in that period from 56 to 86, there were many, many things that happened which allowed this enterprise, which had started from scratch with four brothers who had little education and little business background and almost no resources, to start from scratch and to get to a place where they became a model for many, many others. So one of the things they had done was to base the business on a strong set of values, which were actually their own family values, which was to look at people as their most important resource as they went along, which was to look at fairness as the basis of all that they did in business, and fairness to all concerned, which may sound unusual, but it's easy to be fair to yourselves, but very often it's very tough to be fair to other people you're dealing with or negotiating with. And they also established a set of ancillaries or part suppliers which did not actually exist earlier, because all critical components for all manufacture in India used to come from Great Britain during the British rule here. And they told them that we will help you find the right component, find the equipment, but we will not fund the business for you. And also we will not run the business for you. So let us work as partners, even if we are family or friends. We have to treat each other as business partners. So it established very early on the concept of arm's length pricing, corporate governance, very low inventory, just-in-time inventory. All of these got established very early on. These, which are now considered global modern governance and management principles, got established right at the early days of Hero Cycles and subsequently the other businesses in the group getting set up.
So there is this story that you talk about these anecdotes that you have while your family members who had gone to Japan. Your father had first gone and he wanted to meet someone senior at Honda when he realized that they were looking for a partner in India, and surprisingly he ended up meeting the person who was scouting for India transaction. And then there have been a lot of trips back and forth, but when the final discussion was happening, you write that how they offered the transaction. They offered the partnership for the bike business, whereas you guys were looking for the scooter partnership, and you were quite surprised in that meeting. Could you take us through that entire transaction, how he decided that this has to be done, while everybody in India was waiting around their phones, waiting for the phone call back home?
Absolutely. So the experience of working with the Japanese was a pretty unique and an interesting one. So my father with one of my cousins made the first early trips, and they found two strange things. One, no one came to receive them at the airport, okay, which in India was most commonplace. If somebody goes, you invite somebody, you receive them at the airport, etc. And there they just sent a message, you can take a bus. That was the other strange thing. And in my father and our experience, when you invite somebody, you send a car, you send people to receive them at the airport. They said, by the way, it's more convenient to come by bus from the airport to Tokyo. And there were actually many, many stories. So, for example, when they went into their office, they offered green tea. And my father said he would like a masala chai. And they had no clue what a masala chai was. So the whole system went into a tizzy. And they obviously used their research department to figure out what a masala chai is. And of course, before the day was out, they had masala chai. And every other time when he went subsequently, they would have masala tea waiting for him. So the learning from them was quite unique in terms of the amount of preparatory work, amount of research work, the discipline on timing. All of this came through first-hand lessons, seeing them work. And because India was in those days a scooter country, obviously our desire and our choice was to go to Honda to get a design for a scooter. But they chose to give scooter as a partnership to Kinetic and set up the company called Kinetic Honda. And they offered us a motorcycle, So after the initial surprise, my father was quick to recover. He said, "It's fine. We will work with the motorcycle, but we only had two conditions." He asked for a larger capacity than the one which was offered. They had offered a 70 odd cc motorcycle, which they thought would be very popular in a country like India, a developing country, which they had seen happen in other developing countries in the East and Southeast Asia. So he insisted on a 100 cc, and he insisted on a price line being below 10,000 rupees, finally to the consumer. And he said, we want only the four-stroke technology, because while that's more complex, that's a cleaner technology. So clearly he was seeing way ahead of his time, because things like emission, etc., became important more than 20 years after that, or 25 years after that. So it was a unique opportunity. In the first 10 to 15 years, we learned a lot from the Japanese in terms of process, layouts, productivity, accuracy, insistence that the quality is right first time and every time. But in the last almost 15 years of the partnership, they learned a lot from here, and they took things back into their system. So Honda learned a lot also from Hero and from Hero Honda, which became a model of productivity, efficiency, etc. So it was truly a two-way partnership, which served both the partners exceedingly well. And of course, it established Honda as a big brand in India and in the region. And it allowed us to grow from a bicycle and moped company into a leading two-wheeler player in the world.
Great. I wanted to understand, the book, while you talk about the entire journey of your grandfather, then your father, and then the brothers, and now the new kids are coming into the fold of the business. There is this need to reinvent the wheel over time, as as we also grow and as the country grows and the kind of consumption stories change. What is the way forward for the family, and how is Hero Group now reinventing itself towards newer things?
So I was actually reading a note written by Mr. Chidambaram in his blog only 2 days ago about this book. He said, I've been at home, so I read this book and I just wrote this, that it seems that Hero was ahead of the curve right from the beginning. That, as I said, many practices which are now becoming contemporary or desirable were being practiced way ahead of what many others were doing. So one was, there was a lot of growth in terms of setting up industrial and manufacturing units in the early days. So many members of the family got groomed and trained in these, and then were able to take charge and run these independently. So we used to have, over a period of time, one member of the family involved either in one division, one unit, or one company. And initially working with an elder in the family, preferably not their own parent. But this was not always the case, but in many cases, that's what we practiced. Allowed good induction, allowed good training, and allowed this to happen in an objective manner. And over a period of time, he also went into services, so that even across the overall industry sector, from manufacturing itself, we had built a hedge in the services sector as well. As it happened, our manufacturing companies continued to be much larger, but it did allow us that spread across the different segments. What it also allowed us to do was to encourage every next generation to tap into their own interest and their passion. So 2 times or 3 times over the last 10 or 12 years, we have restructured the group. First, for the entire family at my father's generation level, we restructured the group to be ownership to transfer to 4 different entities. And then into the next generation, also we restructured, because as you're aware, for most business families, it's known that by the generation 3, businesses and families get destroyed. So here was a chance for us to build this business so that they run into perpetuity, and more entrepreneurship, enterprise, and energy is available to the businesses over time, even if the ownership was restructured and divided amongst different parts of the same family. So what was originally the hero group became part of the family. But if I look at some of the whole now, all of them are actually doing quite well. Many have diversified, many have set up new businesses, and all of them have grown their existing businesses. And some have gone into areas like real estate. Many have set up enterprises globally. Some have acquired companies overseas. So we've gone into newer areas like clean energy, financing. We've also encouraged the younger generation to follow their passion, which may or may not necessarily be business. So one of them has become a chocolatier. She makes the best chocolate in India. One has become a fashion designer. One runs a university. So we've actually encouraged members of the family to be good at whatever they feel they are best at. So that allows people to truly tap into their potential. And this is one of the ways we looked at reinventing the family and reinventing the business at the same time. So the businesses are set up in an always contemporary manner, which means they are not only set up in a modern style at one time, but they are designed to relook at themselves objectively and critically to see what changes they need to make all the time. And not only have we set up the businesses in this manner, we've also set up our not-for-profit foundation activities in the same manner. You may be aware we are quite involved in the areas of education, clean drinking water, healthcare, vocational skills, especially for young girls and boys, and especially focused in the rural areas. We are also very deeply focused on arts and culture across the country. And each one of them receives the same attention as any of our business entities do.
Great. There's one last question that I have to ask. In your book, you have very extensively written about how the company has seen many political cycles, economic cycles, when the GDP started falling, or when suddenly production had to halt before the emergency, and you talked about the whole the just-in-time model that the company had even in those days to overcome situation where you did not have product lying in your godown, so that there was no discrepancy in managing the entire cash system or the money system at that point in time. We're right now in a time where there's this coronavirus pandemic that is there everywhere. People are struggling, companies are forced to now shut down in India. There is a huge mismatch in cash flows that companies are facing. What really are the takeaways right now for companies, because you've seen something similar as a cycle before?
So you're right. Obviously, since the company has been around for a while and has continued to grow over this period of time, it has seen every kind of cycle, many different kind of challenges coming from people, technologies, environment, political situation, wars, emergencies, etc. The only time it actually had to stop before this our operation was during the emergency. And now I'm talking about hero cycles, while some of the other companies did have other issues like IR issues, etc. This is probably only the second time it's actually having to shut down. And even then, people offered to stay inside the plant, as they did this time as well, and offered to keep working. The only challenge with that is that because we keep no stock of components inside, everything comes in every day, gets manufactured or produced every day, and is then shipped out. So there is never enough stock to keep producing for a long period of time. So this has been an unusual challenge, but because of the way the company has worked, the people in the company, most of them are around for a long time. Our companies have very low attrition because it's a very people-driven organization. So at any time of an emergency of this nature, everybody pitches in as if it's his or her own work. And that makes a big, big difference to the outcome. So planning and forecasting is one of the things we do constantly in all of the companies. Even though now, as I said, the ownership is in different groups and different blocks, but the culture remains somewhat similar across the group and across all the enterprises. So we did the same thing this time when we saw what was going on in our offices. A few weeks, 2 weeks before the shutdown, we had already started sending half the team to work from home. So we had set up process and protocols for people who were working from home. And literally 3 days before the shutdown, I had written a letter to all our team members and said, we would want you to work from home. So we were a little bit better prepared than many others. And we had set up daily morning calls, afternoon meetings, evening reviews for each of the departments. And we encouraged people to build a discipline for themselves to work from home, to dress up as if you're going to office, to maintain a table for yourself where you keep your pen, pad, and your smartphone device so that that becomes your office for the day. And also to use the time to build your personal capabilities. Because we do not expect people to work 9 or 10 hours as otherwise they end up doing, because many of them work beyond the 8 hours out of their own choice. As a family and as a group, we are working in multiple areas. One is to support the community kitchens that have been set up through many of our own cafeterias and canteens, cooking and supplying meals. Second, we are part of a coalition that has been set up by CII across India of automotive, auto component, and medical device companies to supplement the shortage that exists in the country. I'm personally also working with the Delhi government to see how we can help Delhi city itself, as has happened in Mumbai, Bangalore, Pune, and some of the other cities. So 20 of us friends from industry have got together to support all of the initiatives of the protective gear, testing kits, cleaning the streets, availability calculations for hospital beds and ICUs. So in a manner of speaking, supplementing and supporting the effort being made by the government at the central government level, by the health ministry, the textile ministry, the commerce and industry ministry, to ensure that we as citizens become responsible citizens and try and see how in our own way we do the right thing, we demonstrate this to others, and at the same time supplement the effort being made by institutions, foundations, companies, and the government, for all of us as a people together to come out of this, because this is a situation which is completely unforeseen by this generation of ours. People are comparing this to the World War, to the Great Plague, to the Great Depression, and this is a twin-pronged attack at us. One is on the health and lives, and second, because of the way we can address this through shutdowns. Second is on livelihoods. So we need to figure out a way also to balance both of these. So we are involved in some of these areas on thinking around this, how and when economic activity should restart, and when it does, how do you do it with full safety, and keeping in mind that eventually you have to beat this virus. The actual vaccine or a treatment is a long distance away. It's probably 12 to 18 months away. So we have to do this in people's health and for their lives, especially for the more at risk part of the population, the elderly, or those who are otherwise physically or mentally handicapped, those with other challenges, those with diabetes or cardiac disease, any comorbidities. So we are, in our own way, attempting to do this in a responsible manner. This again comes back from the way I guess we've all been brought up, with teachings from the Arya Samaj, from various foundations that have been around us, in deep involvement in Rotary and Lions of my father and my uncles and many of the members of the family. And at the same time, we are saying, please remember, don't take yourself too seriously. This too shall pass. So also learn to enjoy this, learn to live in a manner that it does not mentally affect you negatively. And you also figure out a way to spend time happily and productively with family and friends, family physically at home, and with friends over the internet, because this tool has become an amazing tool of communication in this period for all of us to use for our business and for socializing.
Thank you so much, Mr. Munjal, for sharing the story of the family and the Hero Group. And now I'm going to read an excerpt from the book, The Hero Honda Partnership. By the year 1981, Hero was the market leader in bicycles and mopeds. Exports had taken off. Hero Cycles had experimented with high-end and complex bicycles for the overseas market with considerable success. 5 companies were up and running, and a 6th, Munjal Casting, had been inaugurated. On the face of it, Hero seemed to be on a strong wicket, but there were challenges below the surface. Moped sales were beginning to falter. The zesty little vehicles had had a good run, but the consumer fad was now over, partly because they tended to break down easily. Unlike bicycles, after-sales service was problematic as not every mechanic could repair them. Also, it was very difficult to ride pillion on the moped, as it was essentially designed for one rider. The great Indian spirit of Jugaad could only go so far. Bolt of a partnership with Piaggio, my father began casting around for other foreign collaborations. With the prescient vision that contributed so much to Hero's success, he wanted to take the company global, and that meant a tie-up with a big international brand. He brought up the subject at one of the family's regular informal meetings. First, he spoke of the necessity of expanding the family business in tandem with the growth taking place in the country and the increasing aspirations of the people as a result of the opportunities this progress offered. The Munjal progeny had now grown up and had been placed in various group companies. Educated and forward-looking, they represented a talent pool that could power Hero's growth in the decades to come. Then, my father pointed to the shift in government policy. The restrictive regime that began in the 1970s was coming to an end. The motorcycle and scooter segments, thanks to FERA, had seen neither new products nor firms entering the market since it was heavily dependent on foreign collaborations. The pendulum, having reached apogee, had begun its reverse swing. From emergency 1975 to 77, through the Janta governments 1977 to 80 and Indira Gandhi's return to power in 1980, the direction of the government's economic policy gradually began to change. Price controls were lifted, MRTP lost momentum, foreign exchange controls were eased, and companies were allowed automatic expansion of capacity. The waiting list for Bajaj scooters eventually disappeared. Now, foreign collaboration for two-wheelers up to 100cc had been allowed. This created new opportunities for two-wheeler manufacturers in the motorcycle and scooter segments, opening up avenues for new products, business partners, and markets. For the domestic two-wheeler industry, with the market characterized by high demand and low supply, this was good news. The 1980s promised to be a decade of increased production and better quality. At first, family and friends discouraged my father against pursuing foreign partnerships. Mr. Rai recalls, there was fear that this was going to be a big gamble. What if they get into a partnership only to have it fall through? What about money? Building a partnership would require a large infusion of funds. Where would it come from? My father, the dreamer, was undeterred in his search for potential partners. He was determined that Hero would transition from being a bicycle and moped manufacturer to a leader in scooters and motorcycles. Ensconced in his office with a notepad and pen, he shot off handwritten letters to automotive majors in Europe and elsewhere. He researched the global scenario, deploying his transnational network of contacts. As my brother Suman observes, he was brilliant with his homework. He had meticulously scanned and gauged companies looking to enter the Indian market. He homed in on Japan. Indeed, all automotive manufacturers were looking eastwards. Honda, one of the world's largest automotive companies and the top producer of two-wheelers, had a number of offerings with an engine capacity of 100cc and less. This was exactly what my father wanted, to facilitate a seamless transition for customers, from cycles and mopeds to fuel-efficient and low-maintenance motorcycles and scooters. Honda had in fact already advertised for an Indian partner. The paucity of vehicles in India and the sheer size of the market made it an attractive proposition. My father was convinced he could get Honda on board, provided he could get into the boardroom for a meeting. Thank you so much for listening to us, and I hope you will come back for the next episode when we will come with another book from their collection. Thank you.